Aloha, listeners and viewers. Welcome to Intermission, a conversation series between artists. Intermission is the Hawaii Chamber Music Festival's exclusive online channel with Broadcast Hawaii. I'm your host, festival founder Chris Yick, and today we have a very special guest with us, French horn player from National Symphony Orchestra, Markus Osterlund. And for those of you who don't know, Markus has performed with HCMF in the past, back in 2018, I believe, in the winter time. And he is from Hawaii, and now he's in one of the best orchestras in the country. So, I mean, aloha, Markus. How have you been doing?
Aloha. I'm great, thanks. Yeah, it's great to finally be talking about Hawaii and remembering that lovely performance in December.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, let's get right into what's happening right now. All of us as musicians, you know, I've started every episode with this, and I feel it's very important to just talk about how has COVID affected your life at the moment.
Sure, that's a big one. So, I mean, I think musicians in general are unfortunately some of the more adversely affected people by the coronavirus, and nobody's life is normal right now during COVID-19, and the quarantine has been going on now, I think 2.5, 3 months. You're like, what a long time. And so I don't want to sound like it's just me who's suffering, I think, but it is all musicians are probably more adversely affected than the average individual, because the main thing that we do, other than entertain and try to reach people's hearts with music, is perform for audiences, and let people gather in groups, create sort of a community of people who can interact and chat during intermissions of concerts or
for sure
recitals together. And so that's just not something that is going to be happening for a while.
No, absolutely. And I think what's interesting is, before COVID-19, the narrative of music was simply, if you have an orchestra job, oh, you're stable, you're secure. But it seems COVID, no, it's all good. It seems COVID has just exposed us as musicians, really. It's just like they found that one thing, our Achilles heel, which is get rid of audience members. I mean, how has that affected you and the NSO?
Well, so the NSO has been doing a great job, in my opinion, of really trying to stay on top of the game, keep people interested, provide content for the subscribers, and make a lot of concerts previously played that were archived digitally available for free. And so I think we're now at the point where we're doing 2 past concerts available from the archives, broadcasted online for free. We've done upwards of probably 10 or so recording projects. Either, we did one that I played on that was just the brass section. We've done a couple that were orchestra-wide for Memorial Day. We did one that was for the graduating class of 2020. We played Circumstance. That was the most recent as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on that NSO is doing that's really good, and it's more or less the same as what other orchestras are doing generally. There's also been like what we call couch concerts that the Kennedy Center offers. So usually like solo or families of the NSO musicians playing together, and people sort of tune into that through Facebook Live. So there's a lot of stuff going on. The main thing is, like you said, audiences can't gather in groups, and what that means basically is that there's no orchestra in the country, or probably the world, that has a profitable business model right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not even from the audience perspective, but just as an orchestral perspective, the ensemble was already a large gathering, you could say, right? I mean, you guys were like not 6 feet apart, obviously, just like 2 feet apart, and that's on top of just all the nitty gritty of just being in an orchestra. But do you think in some ways this is like a wake-up call for musicians? Like, this is a good time to really say, wow, we have this technology, we need to find different ways of being accessible, and we can't feel so comfortable with just traditional concert hall setting anymore. Like, would you agree with that? Has that experience like affected you personally?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've sort of always had that thought nagging in the back of my mind. I'm very much a person who likes progress. I like technology. I'm really into like the newest stuff out there. And pursuing music for me, especially orchestral music, has been an interesting, I don't want to say contradiction, but it's been an interesting thing that you know, we study music, we perform it, that's 200 at least years old at times.
Sure.
And it's really being performed in the exact same way as it was back then. There isn't much that has really changed. And so finally, I like to look at silver linings, and you know, there's a lot that's really dark about what's happening with COVID-19. But the silver linings, I think, are that everybody in every field is getting the push that probably should have come a long time ago with the advent of new technologies like Zoom calls and emails and just the communication abilities that we have that can also be used for music. Finally, employers and employees are realizing that there are a lot of things that maybe they don't have to come into work for. They can do from home. There are a lot of things that can be sent in an email that don't have to be in a face-to-face meeting. And the same applies to the orchestra, you know. There's so many avenues of engaging our audience members and our patrons and our fans, whatever you want to, you know, whoever it might be, digitally from the comfort of their own home in a way that actually broadens access, I think, to classical music, which is something that we've struggled with for so long.
Sure.
You know, people always complain that our audiences are very old from a certain demographic, and, you know, we're not necessarily speaking to minority races. We're not necessarily speaking to people of different socioeconomic classes. And finally, with the internet and the technology and the coronavirus is pushing us to change that.
Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point. I definitely agree with everything you've said in the sense that, like, yeah, classical music and music has definitely been seen as this luxury good. You know, it's very elite. There's a certain stiffness to it, you know, when you come to the concert hall, suit and tie. But do you think now with this broadened accessibility to sort of make it, I guess, pushing it as more of an entertainment, more of a normal good, does that ruin the authenticity? Or does that ruin artistic integrity for you personally? Or do you think it's just whatever our music can reach, that's the best?
Personally, and I know there's a lot of classical musicians out there who wouldn't agree with this. Personally, I think the more the merrier. I like the idea of inclusivity. I like the idea of, you know, not watering down the classical music, because that's a term that I've heard people say when we do pop shows, or we might do programs that are not as traditional as a lot of the players out there would prefer. They say that it's being watered down for the audiences, but I don't think that's super appropriate. I think that everybody deserves to enjoy music, whether it's classical music or not. And so if we can find a way to make classical music more enjoyable for people without dumbing it down, that's almost always a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, would you say in your experience being in the orchestra, there are a lot of audience members, especially if you meet someone who's new to an NSO concert, let's say, they thoroughly enjoy it. Like, from my experience with the festival, for example, it's like my favorite, the most fulfilling thing for me, and the favorite thing I like to see is audience members who don't know about classical music. Because after they attend one of our events, after they see one of us perform, it's not like they didn't like it before. It's now they actually know about it and they actually seem to enjoy it. Has that experience been the same with you and the NSO?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think exposure to classical music is usually a pretty overwhelming experience for somebody for the first time. I mean, I've had friends who are not super familiar with classical music, and I've gotten them a comp ticket, and I've seen very emotional responses from their first exposure to a Mahler symphony, for example. And that's very powerful, because that's the reason why we all got into music.
Sure, absolutely. And now that you mentioned getting into music, let's talk about your journey. I mean, I know a little bit of yours in the sense that, like, we crossed paths briefly at ELI. I think I was just like a middle schooler and you didn't finish. You ended up going to Interlochen, and then, you know, you've had your successes. But before that, like before Interlochen, before Iolani, it was just French horn, right? There must be a reason why you got into all of that. So let's dive right into that. Well, how's your journey in music been?
You know, I think I'm actually one of the luckiest people around, because none of it was planned. None of it was really even, I am where I am almost entirely by chance. And that's scary to me, but also really cool. things could have gone very differently. I started at Iolani School in 7th grade. I transferred from Ma'ema'e Elementary, so I grew
public
up in the,
school.
Yeah, man. I grew up in the Nu'uanu area, and then I got into Iolani, so I started in 7th grade, and you know, one of the requirements is that you take an elective. I think they're called an arts elective, right?
Yep.
So it's long enough that I'm starting to forget. And so I was just thinking to myself as I was signing up for classes, I was like, well, I think my options are visual arts, choir, band, and orchestra. And I think jazz band was for later years, so that's also an option, but not in 7th grade. Yeah. And so I was looking at those, and I was like, well, I don't know anything about any of these subjects, so I guess band. Why not? So I signed up for band, showed up to band class. We spent like a week and a half or 2 weeks just working on breathing before we even touched any instruments whatsoever in band class. Mrs. Muramaru was a wonderful, wonderful instructor and largely responsible for, you know, starting off my journey on into classical music. Then after having us breathe for literally like a week and a half, just brought the end pieces of all the band instruments around the room and had people try them individually. And that was weird. You know, she brought a horn mouthpiece, a trumpet mouthpiece, a trombone mouthpiece, a flute head joint, clarinet, I don't know what they're called, barrel, I guess, mouthpiece, a saxophone mouthpiece, all those things, and just had people blow on them and see if they could make a sound. And usually whoever could make a sound on whatever instrument was assigned that instrument if they wanted to. You know, you would choose between 3 instruments. I think I wrote down trombone, clarinet, and French horn because I literally didn't know any other instruments. So I played a French horn mouthpiece, and she said, "You are going to be a French horn player." That was it.
Wow. So I mean, from there, I mean, you found this new love. Did you end up doing private instruction? Did you enjoy I guess you start off with band, but then eventually you do move into the hybrid of the symphony orchestra at Iolani, right? So it's like, how was your experiences in that?
Oh, it was awesome. It was so fast. I mean, looking back on it, it was like breakneck speed how quickly things were developing. And I think everything feels that way when you're at that age. What was that? I started performing when I was 13. When you're 13, everything is just like back to back because everything is new, you know, it feels crazy. But I started studying privately on the horn maybe 3 months into picking it up because Mrs. Muramaru recommended that everybody do it. But I had some sort of playing test, and she was like, you know, you would really benefit a lot from taking lessons. So I started studying with Robert Johnson, who was playing 4th horn at the time with the Honolulu Symphony. And now he's associate principal in Houston. But so I started studying privately, and I think within a year I was doing the Symphonic Orchestra, where they start bringing the wind players from band class at Iolani. And then I joined Youth Symphony, and within, I think 4 years later, I decided to go to an arts boarding school in northern Michigan away from my mom, my family. So it was very quick. Very, very quick.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've heard everyone's definitely in classical music has heard interlock. And I think there was some people from Iolani afterwards that kind of transferred there to finish their studies. But yeah, I mean, how was the shift culturally for you? I mean, musically, I'm sure being surrounded, it was just like, wow, you were a kid in a candy store. But culturally, it must have been different for you, right? You went from, you know, Hawaii to Michigan, right? So
yeah. It was cold. That's a way, and I'm still not equipped for cold weather. I think DC is cold, and it, you know, gets below freezing maybe not much during the year. So, but the Midwest culture, believe it or not, didn't feel like a foreign country. I mean, it's not a foreign country, but in some ways, you travel to the mainland, certain places, you feel like you're in a foreign country compared to Hawaii. I didn't feel that way because I think the social outlook of people in the Midwest is very hospitable. They're very friendly. They're very talkative. And so that wasn't too different for me. And the music obviously was amazing. To be around peers who shared the passions that I did. And I decided to go into music in 8th grade. Like I told my mom, this is what I want to do in the second year of playing. And so that was not much of an investment, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then from Interlochen moving forward, what happened next? Was it Rice University? I heard.
It was, yeah. Someone's done the homework. This is great. Yeah, so I knew about Rice from my first lesson with Robert Johnson in 7th grade, because he studied with Bill Vermeulen at Rice. Mm-hmm. And so I had heard the name thrown around, and that was always sort of at the back of my head that this is a horn player that I know in the horn world. And when you're first exposed to the horn world or the classical music world, you don't necessarily know a lot of names outside of Yo-Yo Ma.
Sure.
So, you know that.
Yeah.
So in my head, Bill Vermeulen was one of the first names up there with Yo-Yo Ma, interestingly enough. And totally different instrument, totally different world. But I studied with somebody who studied with him. And then soon after I started playing, the Honolulu Symphony folded, which was rough for everybody involved, including the students. You know, the musicians obviously suffered the most, not getting their paychecks and having to find other work for, I think it was 2 years or so, a year or two, where there was no symphony in Hawaii. And but the students also were faced with teachers who were leaving and out of work and not having enough time to really continue teaching, or having only time to continue teaching. So I actually went through 4 horn teachers in Hawaii only because 3 of them left, one after another. And directly after studying with Robert Johnson, I studied with Wade Butin, who now also lives in Houston, and also went to Rice. So I always sort of, and like I said, I am so lucky. I don't know how. But always in my head, there was always this idea of, I want to go to Rice and study with Bill Vermeulen from 7th grade. So my mom was the best mom ever and took me to Houston on our way to other places to visit family in Sweden and so forth. We would stay there a day, take a lesson. I would take a lesson, and he recommended Interlochen. Other people recommended Interlochen. So part of the reason why I went to Interlochen was to be closer to all the conservatories and the universities in the mainland, but also because I knew that Bill Vermeulen goes and does a class or 2 there every single year. Mm-hmm. So everything just fell into place for me.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, your conservatory experience at Rice definitely has led you to major successes. I mean, prior to National Symphony, you can, I guess, brag a little bit about yourself. There were multiple positions that you've won before getting right into the NSO, right?
Yeah, there were. Yes, wow, thank you. So actually, while I was at Rice, in my sophomore year, I was back in Hawaii for, it must have been for summer vacation, actually. So it would have been around June, right after classes ended.
Sure.
At Rice. And I was back in Hawaii, just, hanging out, staying at home.
Yeah.
Enjoying myself before I had a summer festival lined up to go to, or a couple of summer festivals later in the summer. And there was an audition for a position with the Hawaii Symphony. And I was already home, and so I figured I would sign up for it. I even got asked to proctor some of the other auditions that they were doing. And so, that was 2014. And I proctored a percussion audition for the Hawaii Symphony, a violin audition, and a cello audition. And I've since gotten to know the cellist who won that audition, Josh, who we played with.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. We played, at your festival, which was awesome. And so, I ended up winning that audition, and they offered me a position, and it was.
Were you torn?
I was extremely torn. I can't even begin to explain. Even my teacher, Bill Vermeulen at the time, had just told us many stories of him winning a job at the end of his freshman year when he was a college student. And he dropped everything, just forsook the degree and went and played the job, which I think was, I'm not going to say something wrong, but it was with an orchestra of maybe similar size. And so I was really tempted to do it, but my mom was adamant that I get a degree. So
Did you ever think about juggling both with,
because it's in Hawaii, because it's far enough away, I don't think it would have been possible, especially with how stringent Rice University is with their requirements. I mean, I had trouble getting out of orchestra rehearsals with the Rice University Orchestra to go play with the Houston Symphony.
Wow.
So they were very, very inflexible for a good reason. I mean, I understand why, and I'm very grateful for everything I learned in the orchestra that I did play. So, but yeah, so that was the Hawaii Symphony audition, and then not long after that, in January following that June, so I guess that's 6 months later during my junior year, I won the audition for San Antonio Symphony, third horn, third/associate, and so they were very flexible, and I was at that point close enough to the time that I would be able to graduate early, a semester early, so they were flexible enough to line something up, and Rice University also ended up being flexible for me to sort of find a way to do both as much as I could. So I had that lined up all before NSO, and that very lucky, like I said.
So what made you audition for the NSO? Was it just like, oh, there's an NSO opening, might as well try, I have a job?
Well, so you and I are familiar. You and I know, maybe some of our listeners might not, that in the classical music world, nationally, in the entire USA, you're looking at, for horn at least, between 5 to 10 jobs every year. I assume bass is on a similar par, and maybe some instruments like violin and cello, where there are more bodies actually sitting on stage in each orchestra, there are more jobs than that, but I can't imagine more than
but the competition is still just as fierce given the scale.
Exactly. There's so many more string players, and frankly, they're generally better musicians than the players are, so it's equally competitive. And but yeah, I mean, at maximum, I can't imagine any instrument having more than 25, 30 jobs a year in the entire country. So I took every single audition that was that year. From the Hawaii Symphony audition to the NSO audition, actually, that was a year. It was June, and then it was June. Am I getting the timing of this lined up?
2015, those 2 years?
Yeah. Wait. No, the NSO audition was 2016. So maybe it was 2 years. 2015, 2014. Maybe I have the year wrong. Maybe it was 2015. Either way, I took every horn audition that in the entire country one year. And it was 7 of them. And the last one just so happened to be NSO in June. Then there was a big break over the summer, and the next audition wasn't until like September or something like that. And so I, going into it, knew that like it was sort of my last my last stand for at least several months. And those 7 auditions, out of all of them, they all went well. I mean, I think I made finals or won or got a trial in a lot of them, but the NSO one was just 5 months after San Antonio. So I played off and on with the San Antonio Symphony really only for 5 months. I still consider it to be a very formative time for me, but yeah, that was it was a wild year, very busy.
For sure. Yeah. Well, you mentioned, all these, you took every audition possible, and that's something I guess people don't really see. I think a lot of people, when they see musicians and their successes, they only look at the wins, the things that we do achieve. But, take me through the thought process of every audition. Like, I'm sure every audition that you didn't necessarily win the job, you won something else, I'm sure, musically or experience. What through all that?
Sure. I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because it's so pervasive that, the people that we look up to in the music world are all people who are successful. That's how things are. People look up to Bill Gates for being successful. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of comparing yourself to those successes without giving a single thought to the failures along the way. And so I think musicians especially are so hard on themselves, looking at people who have jobs or have a soloist career or play with, a premier chamber group or run a festival like you do, and really just feel like complete and utter failure without recognizing that, like, in order to get where these people have gotten, they've taken dozens of auditions, or they've started and failed on so many different projects, or
you get a lot more no's than you get yes, kind of thing.
Like the tip of the iceberg, where what you see above the water is this pointy little piece of ice, and actually below it, it's just a mountain of material. And it's really, it's really pervasive and really tough for musicians as a whole. Where was I going?
Well, I mean, like you said earlier, like every audition has just, even if you didn't necessarily win the job, it was just like,
that's right.
A really good experience. And also, but most importantly, it was just, you must have felt very emotional through these kind of auditions, right? Because it's a mental toll, not just the physical exhaustion of practicing and whatnot.
So I remember I was going to say, I have a quote from my teacher at Rice. He always would say, the worst thing that can happen when you take an audition is get better. Mm-hmm. In short, the worst thing that can happen is that you learn. Yes, there's a mental toll, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And, that year I took 7 auditions. I mean, I was flying around San Antonio, Baltimore, Seattle, DC, Hawaii. Like I was all over, and it's expensive and it's tough, but at the end of the day, I really felt growth and I really felt momentum above everything else. And so it's important to recognize that you can't just teleport from point A to point B, success being theoretically point B, right? There's a journey along the way, and if you don't get the momentum, it's going to be that much harder to get where you want to go. I think NSO was, I used to know the exact number, but it was about my 13th or 14th audition. And, there are some people who win their first audition. They're amazing. They blow my mind. But I would, if I had to guess, the average of number of auditions before people win a job is more than that.
Sure.
Dozens of auditions often.
Definitely. You mentioned something very interesting about this journey. I mean, obviously your journey from Hawaii and stuff, like you said, it was right time, right place sort of thing. But from your experience being in Hawaii, you can also attest to the fact that there is talent, like musical talent exists, and they may not necessarily become full-time musicians, but from your experience being in the youth symphony and all these other programs in Hawaii too, it's just like there are people who are just so passionate music who want to make a career in music, but they're afraid. What kind of words can you offer? Because people, I'm not going to say me because I'm still at school, but people like you, it's like, that what you've done is sort of the dream. That's the standard that every Hawaii music kid wants to achieve. So what kind of inspiration can you offer?
Sure. Oh man, that's let me think. Let me just distill something. So every time I visit Hawaii, and now it's or it had been planned to be every single year because I'm lucky and I have been asked to teach at PMI, which stands for Pacific Music Institute. Yeah. And it's a program that's held at the University of Hawaii. It's run by the Hawaii Youth Symphony, and it's a program that I did when I was in 9th and 10th grade, if I remember correctly. And it's hugely important. I think it's fantastic, but it really it's shown me, going back as a teacher, exactly what the landscape of classical music, and not just classical music, there are other, there's jazz groups and there's all sorts of different, but what the music landscape looks like in Hawaii. And it looks better than when I was around. And I think it's always getting better. And the sheer passion, like you said, of all the students out there is really inspiring. And PMI is interesting because it changed pretty drastically last year in scope. They secured a lot of things, and they invited a lot of teachers from around the country, people from Kansas City, Toronto,
prominent orchestras in the country, definitely.
Exactly, yeah. And so all of the faculty that I interacted with were really, really impressed and really, really heartwarmed by the landscape of Hawaii, of music in Hawaii. I mean, it's so isolated. I know none of them, having never visited Hawaii before, didn't necessarily know what to expect. I mean, you go to teach at a festival and you kind of don't know what you're going to get or what's going to happen or what it is that you need to talk about. And all of them were really impressed, above all, with the level of people who were so young and how receptive they were to what people had to say. And so I think that if there were or are any like young aspiring musicians out there, it doesn't have to be classical music. Nobody has to take the trajectory or the path that I took. There's so many different ways to making it or finding your way into a music career. But what I would say is to just throw yourself into it. You know, Hawaii is isolated and it's small, but that's not an impediment anymore, like it might have been even 20 years ago, because we have the internet, we have Spotify, we have Apple Music. Every student who wants to access the highest quality, the upper echelons of, music making in the history of mankind can do a Google search and learn.
Definitely.
The resources are available and it's totally possible. There's no reason to be afraid. That's what I would say.
You mentioned all this faculty being heartwarmed, and you mentioned like the level of playing has just been tremendously high. It's a pleasant surprise.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you say that, like, in some ways this shines a light and kind of puts Hawaii on the map in the sense that it is a gem. Like the state is a gem for talent and students, but most importantly, we have very important teachers. Like we have critical teachers who are just like sort of making the scene for our students. Would you say that's the case?
Yes, 100%. I look up so much to the teachers that I had in Hawaii. Not just my private horn teachers, not just my music teachers. I mean, all of the teachers that I had. Having gone to Iolani, I had so many wonderful people in my life that were great role models.
Yeah.
Band directors, orchestra directors, Ms. Hafner, we're both familiar with.
Yeah.
And, these are awesome role models. And on my side, the band side, Ms. Murmura, I brought up Mr. Diao.
Yeah.
Mr. DeMello, running the whole performing arts department, has created lots of great students, and they are great role models. There's a reason why the level is high in Hawaii.
For sure. Yeah. So you mentioned the importance of role models in Hawaii and how like the level of playing is so high and whatnot. But what do you think is that little X factor that's separating Hawaii from other places? Because Hawaii is it's a very cultural place. Like the people are so warm, so kind. But objectively speaking, the scene hasn't been at its full potential, right? So what do you think is missing from your experiences now in the NSO and just San Antonio and everything you've been through and festivals and whatnot? What do you think Hawaii is missing that can take it to the next level? What can make us, what's the term? Like the flagship of the Pacific kind of thing for us.
That's a good question. That one needs some thought. It's everything is there.
Yeah.
Everything that's necessary is there. There's nothing that's missing. And Hawaii does stand out in so many ways. I think if it were to be sort of what some people might call a musical powerhouse, of which there are certain areas in the country that are. Philly, where you are, is one. I think Texas is, for their marching band culture, their just band culture in general. I think Michigan is another. California. If for Hawaii to be that sort of scene in the Pacific, what is missing? I think there's a culture of, I think, man, this is hard to put into words. It's if only the culture of the local culture, like the local history, had more to do with the classical music world, with the other fields. If there were a stronger connection, for example, between the Hawaii Symphony and the Hawaii Youth Symphony to what people think of when they think of Hawaii, whether that means, and I played with the Hawaii Symphony a number of years ago, and Jake Shimabukuro was soloist.
Oh, the ukulele concerto.
Yeah. It was his first time playing with an orchestra, and he was moved to tears. It was amazing. Yeah. It was a beautiful piece and a wonderful performance, and everybody involved was absolutely thrilled out of their minds.
Sure.
If that sort of thing were more common and more, orchestras were the youth symphony, the school orchestras, if they were more embracing of the native Hawaiian heritage and the culture and the mythology and the tourism, all of those things that when people go to Hawaii, when people think of Hawaii, they look at it as a vacation destination. If somehow the music world could be more in the forefront of that image, whether that be recordings of original Hawaiian works done by the orchestras, or if that were, the inclusion of more Hawaiian composers or Hawaiian language writing. I know there are a number of composers. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't exist, but I think it should be so much more in the center of everything.
Yeah.
I think the Hawaii Symphony did a fantastic job by contracting Jake Shimabukuro to play, because he's a celebrity. Outside of Hawaii, people know who he is. He's like the ukulele guy. So he should frankly probably be playing every season with them. If all of the concerts that he did were sold out, it seems like if that were that little diamond, that little glint in Hawaii's eye, that would really just, I think, take things farther. And because then the orchestra becomes a part of his celebrity. It becomes a part of his fame. And so people looking up to Jake Shimabukuro, which we all do, would look up to the orchestra or the groups, the youth symphonies, the school orchestras that are playing stuff with him. They would look up to the orchestras in the same way.
No, I mean, you bring up an interesting point. I think Hawaii, out of all places, really has a strong sense of like, from home is where the heart is kind of attitude, right?
Yeah.
So like, all these great musicians who have made it, who are from Hawaii, maybe that is the key, right? Because you mentioned Jake, but if we're shooting for the stars, shooting for the moon kind of thing, you could even say like Bruno Mars with Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Or even it could even be something on a smaller level where it's like, we have who's a great classical musician who's come, or even outside of Jake, there are other ukulele players that we can invest in, or people like Mr. Byron Yasui doing more just like the concerto.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I think you might be onto something with that kind of factor that could really just connect the culture of Hawaii with sort of our world in classical music, would you say?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that the idea of role models and finding those role models in celebrities and mentors and things is really important. I was really lucky, actually, that I had some very clear, fantastic role models who were horn players when I was living in Hawaii and studying. I had directly older than me, Rory Onishi. He's 2 years older than I am, and he was my first exposure to the Hawaii Youth Symphony when I joined in YS1. I was playing second horn to him, and I was like, dang, this guy sounds beautiful, and he just always plays with such a wonderful sound and beautiful phrasing, and like, so he was a role model for me. And Young Kim, who I'm not sure if you know, you probably do.
I've heard the name,
Yeah, he went to Iolani. I think he's 5 years older than I am, or 6 years older, and he went through all the ropes and went into the horn world. He was in the youth symphony, and I met him when I was in, I think it was 8th grade or 9th grade, and he came back and helped me prepare for my youth symphony audition. So having those role models on a bigger scale for just the average, middle school student to go to a Hawaii Symphony Orchestra concert and see something that they're more familiar with that ties into what Hawaii culture would be so powerful.
I think you're also bringing up a good point in general for the music profession, which is, like this cross-pollination of other professions in music. We talk about the basic ones, food and music, art and music, visual art and music, but there seems to be more relationships, right? You could argue for music that could sort of put us on a more sustainable path. Would you agree?
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things that I really enjoyed that the Youth Symphony did every year was put on a concert with Willie K, the Christmas, not Christmas, but December fundraiser. And it was basically a gala, with bake sales and food. People were eating dinner as the concert was happening.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing, while also being very financially sustainable. was really powerful in like bringing Hawaiian language and Hawaii culture to the concert hall.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. So I mean, Marcus, for your age, and you're very young, you've had such an accomplished career, but you could say you've had it all, maybe. I mean, what's next for you?
Oh, you're younger than me, so I thanks, but you too. What is next? That's a good question. This is something that I've been grappling with now, mostly because of COVID-19.
Sure.
The horizon of when we'll be able to play on stage in the concert hall again is very unclear. And I, of course, think we'll be doing broadcasts and home concerts and chamber concerts much sooner than we'll be doing stuff in the orchestra, the full orchestra with a full audience. But that does leave some questions, some uncomfortable questions about what our orchestra is going to look like in the near future. And if this sort of thing happens again, God forbid, in who knows, 10, 15, 20 years, there's some other virus mutation and we struggle to come up with a vaccine. I don't think it would mean the end of orchestras at all, but it's worth being realistic about what can change in the world with regard to classical music.
Yeah.
So I've been generally on the path with the goals that I someday will end up being a first horn player or associate principal horn player somewhere in a city that I love. And I love DC. I love my job. It's fantastic. But at some point you do sort of want a little bit more of to be making the big boy decisions in the section. So that's always been the goal. Whether or not that happens, whether or not this derails some things and pushes me more towards being a better member of the orchestra, on committees, or working with management in certain ways, or I don't know. I'm just trying to say I don't know.
Teaching maybe could be an option too.
I love teaching. I think teaching is one of the most important things that a musician can do, and frankly, I think it's part of our duty to contribute that to the students, to be a resource for the people who want it and make the space better for the next generation.
Mm-hmm. You know, when you were in 7th grade, just starting horn, and you were just on this path of, I'm just gonna get to Rice and we'll figure it out kind of thing. Did you ever have like that dream job, like whatever orchestra, after listening and being exposed, like if you could be the principal horn of any orchestra you wanted to, what's your eyes on the prize going to be?
It was always Berlin Philharmonic. I think that was, especially growing up, because as I was entering and familiarizing myself with the horn space, the orchestra world, the digital concert hall came into existence, the Berlin Philharmonic Digital Concert Hall. And that just changed everything. I remember, setting aside an entire evening, closing my doors to my room and telling my mom, "Don't come inside. I'm watching a horn concerto by Berlin Philharmonic with Radek Babarak." And so, that it really left a huge impression on me that I wanted to play with that orchestra in some capacity. The dream job, obviously, being the principal. It's open right now, but the auditions have been canceled. So I don't know. I mean, whether or not that dream comes to fruition is less important now to me than just personal fulfillment, musical fulfillment, and keeping momentum. I think I've realized now, when I've gotten to where my plan has fallen into place the way I kind of expected it to, I'm realizing now that the goal is less important than, like I said, the momentum, the journey.
Sure.
And so I'm very focused on keeping the journey every day and less focused on where I end up.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think, like we mentioned earlier, how musicians were only sort of famed and sort of seen as just for the achievements, the title, the institutions were established with. But in some ways, it's just like, you can be just as incredible as a musician, right? And not be in like a quote unquote big name orchestra, big name whatever, right? Do you think that has merit because of the education or just the musicianship as an individual? What do you think?
I think the individual musicianship is the most important thing, and I'm glad to have realized that early on. I think it is another one of the traps, not only to look at people's achievements and compare yourself to them as a musician and really sort of feel bad about yourself, but I think the other trap is to do the opposite and not recognize the amazing talent and musicianship and teaching ability that people around you have. It seems very common for people to only measure their mentors or their idols by, are they in a top 5 orchestra? But that's not at all really important. Some of the best musicians I've ever heard play in smaller orchestras around the country. You always have to keep your eyes open and respect the musicianship of even if it's a high school like private teacher who's just an intern or a college student. There are always wonderful parts of everybody's playing and everybody's person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And I guess, well, let's slowly wrap things up. I mean, you've been in many orchestras, you have lots of experience, and you're in the NSO now, but I'm sure you've played Beethoven 5 countless of times.
Sure, yeah.
What are some pieces to you that really resonate in the orchestra repertoire? And also, what is just like, what is a piece that you get really excited about as a brass player?
Just like in the classical repertoire, you mean?
Anything, just in the orchestra.
Okay. So I get really excited, obviously, when there's a Mahler symphony on the program. But that's the brass player in me. Yeah. So we most recently we've done, well, since I've joined the orchestra, we've done Mahler 1, Mahler 2, and Mahler 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so those have all been extremely memorable experiences. Most recently was Mahler 5 in March, or in late February,
Sure.
Which was awesome, and we did a broadcast of it, and the horn section was on fire the whole time. We were slated to take it on tour to Asia, which was canceled for coronavirus reasons. But that was definitely a memorable concert, and I always look forward to those. On the other side of the coin, we did a Mozart festival last year for 2 weeks. 2 weeks with 3 or 4 different programs, lots and lots of stuff, just like back-to-back Mozart for 14 days straight, pretty much, with maybe 1 day off. It was intense. But that was fantastic, and I think we don't play enough Mozart. I don't know how it is with other orchestras, but NSO, I think, should play more Mozart. We do it well, and it's just so classy and so pleasant and really ingenious, in his own way. So I do love, we did Mozart symphonies, we did overtures, we did selections like arias from some of his operas, and they're all just so good.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Mozart has a lot of beautiful works. Well, I guess the final question I'm going to ask is, with the NSO, you guys get big name soloists coming in playing concertos. You guys get so many different opportunities to perform, I'm sure, new works even. In your time in the NSO, what has been your most memorable performance?
I think this isn't actually answering your question because, like you said, we have some of the greatest musicians coming in and playing, and I find myself so lucky to be able to sit in the orchestra and do that. And part of me thinks I might want to actually end up being an associate principal horn player, because nothing makes me happier than playing the concerto with some of the best musicians out there. We played with Yuja Wang, and the concerto was fantastic. She sounded amazing. She's absolutely an incredible musician, but she played an encore from her CD, the name of which is escaping me right now. But it's a solo CD that she released in the past 8 years or so.
Sure.
And this encore just had everybody floored. It was crazy because the Kennedy Center seats, 3,000-ish people, something around that. And I've never heard it during any concert be that silent. Wow. Nobody in the orchestra moved a muscle. Nobody in the audience moved at all the entire time that she was playing. And it was just completely like mind-blowing to hear. And that night on the way home, I put Spotify on, found that album, was listening to it as I was driving home, and came home, made myself a drink, and put it on my Bluetooth speaker because I just couldn't, I couldn't stop thinking about it.
Wow. Was it like something flashy, or was it just some sort of really warm, beautiful song?
It was both. I can't remember if it was a Rachmaninoff prelude or if it wasn't Chopin. It doesn't matter. But if I can go listen to the CD, I'll figure out which one it was. But it had elements of both.
Okay.
It was both flashy, but also had tender moments, and just she had a way of expressing herself above and beyond the music, to the point that the notes were no longer, like, the technique was no longer at all a consideration. It just felt like the rawest, purest expression that I've heard out of any musician.
Wow. That definitely sounds memorable for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. She's amazing.
Well, Marcus, this has been an incredible conversation, and it's great to always have. It's always great for me to talk story with Hawaii people.
Yeah, you too.
And so I guess for those of you listening, tuning in, Marcus is one of many artists we're going to be featuring, and we hope you like and subscribe to Broadcast Hawaii. And I guess any last final thoughts you want to say, Marcus?
Sure. Yeah. Chris is one of the smartest guys out there in the field, and the fact that he's running the Hawaii Chamber Music Festival as well as he is at such a young age is amazing. So any of you who are checking this interview out and listening, definitely continue digging into both his social media presence and upcoming stuff that he's doing, because I have so much admiration for him, and am really hoping that I get to participate in some more performances in the future.
Oh, for sure. We'll definitely bring you back when things are better in the world.
Perfect. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I hope to see you back at home, Marcus.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.